Good day, Hamburger here. In this tutorial, I'm going to teach you how mobile games create their skill targeting system. First up, let's create our asset folder. Then let's have these different kinds of asset. Our arrow, our blocks, our character joystick, button, and our projectile. This pixel point will be used for our debugging. So let's drag this sprites. Okay, and then let's move it to our asset folder. Then let's create our first node, and then another two nodes, the node 2D and the control. Okay, and then our control. Let's call our main node as main, and then our node 2D as main 2D. For our control, let's call it main UI. And then let's set our project settings in the display window. So currently I'm using a phone which have a width of 1280 and 720 for the height. You can use any other number or any other resolution. Then let's have our main 2D to have its camera. Okay, let's rename it camera. Current, and then for the transform, let's use our resolution divided by 2. Then 720 divided by 2. Okay. Let's save the file and then let's call it main. Then in our main UI, let's have a child of texture rec. Then child of the texture rec texture button. So let's call it base, and then the other one stick. So let's drag this. Okay, and then for the stick, let's open the textures, and then okay. So this will be the joystick, and then this will be the base. Okay, and then let's just scale it by 2. Then our stick, let's reposition it as center. Okay, let's create our script. Let's call it main script. Okay, then in our base, let's put our mouse filter to stop. So for our base, okay. And then in our node, let's have a signal of GUI underscore input or GUI underscore input. Okay, and then first up, let's have our reference for the base and the stick. Texture rec, then texture button. Base equals our base, and then stick for our stick. Let's also have another variables. Let's call it var is scaling. So this variable will be used to hold the value if we are currently touching our input or not. So if it is hold or it's release. Let's also have another variable. Let's call it base center position, the vector 2, and base boundaries distance. It's the float. Okay, so it's a float. So this base center position, so this will be the position or the default position of our stick. Okay, we will have another variable for the default. Okay, but basically the base center position is the center position of our base, not the center position of the stick. Okay. And then our base boundaries distance. Okay. So from the center of our base up to the bounds. Okay, so this circular bounds or circular boundaries of our base joystick. Okay, and then let's also have our stick angle. It's also upload, and then our stick default position vector 2. Okay, so our stick default position will be the center. Okay, so if we are not currently holding, or after we release the joystick, it must return to the center of the base. Okay, or our joystick default position. Okay, so let's just comment other parts, and then let's focus on our on-base GUI input. If the event is input event screen touch, so first time touching or first time holding our joystick. So if event is currently press, let's set our easy scaling to true. Then let's create our direction variable. It will be vector 2. So using our base center position direction, okay, from our event dot position. So basically for our touch, wherever we touch our joystick, it will compute for the direction from the center of our base to the touch position. So the direction. Next is our distance. So let's also compute for the distance. So it will be float, then base center position 2. Okay. Also using our base center position, we will now use our distance too. So it's also event that position. Don't forget to make our direction normalize. Okay, so don't forget normalizing our direction. And then now we can compute for our stick angle. So our stick angle will be direction that angle. And then let's also reposition our stick. So whenever we touch the base joystick, our joystick will be moved or be repositioned. So our stick that position, that x equals event that position that x minus stick that size divided by 2. So let's duplicate it. So let's put our x and then our y. Okay. So for x, and then so it will be for x and then for our y. Okay, and then let's also have our event release. Okay, or whenever the event press is false. Okay, so let's put our easy scaling or set our easy scaling to false. Then our stick to that position equals our stick default position. Okay, and then so for our stick default position, so let's set it in our ready function. Stick default position will be the stick position. Okay, so first time we run the program, we will have the stick position to set our stick default position. Okay, and our stick angle to 0. Our initial code is now complete, but let's check for any errors before we run it. So I may have forgotten about our main UI. So the correct reference will be main UI slash base, and then for the stick, main UI slash base slash stick, and then now we can run it. As we can see, whenever I touch the joystick base or even the joystick, it moves to the position of the event position or my touch position. So for the another event, if the event is input event screen drag, let's copy this code, the direction and the distance together with the angle. But this time, we must also add our base position. Okay, so both the direction and the distance, we must add our base dot position. Let's go to our base joystick. Our base joystick have its boundaries. So our joystick here must have its max position or max distance only inside the bounds. Okay, so we cannot touch other parts of the base and then have the stick position together. We must make sure our stick position stays inside our base boundaries. So how can we do that? From the center of the base joystick, it is 70. So you may have any other number, so based on what sprite are you using or based on the size, but on my end, I'm currently using 70. Okay, 70 units of distance from the center up to the base boundaries. So I'll put base boundaries distance to 70. It will be the max distance of our boundaries. And then in our code, in our input event screen drag, if our computed distance is greater than our base boundaries distance, let's compute for our new position. So it will be vector 2, and then let's have our cosine for the x coordinates. So cosine of our stick angle, and then also have our sine of our stick angle. So cosine will be used for our x coordinate, and then the sine will be used for our y coordinates. And then for our new position that x will be cosine multiplied by our base boundaries distance. And then also for our y, and this time we will use the sine. Then let's set our stick position based on our new position plus stick size, that's stick.size divided by 4. Okay, so based on the size of our stick, let's divide it by 4 to have our correct position. Then let's also have our else. So if our distance is inside our base boundaries distance, we will duplicate this code. Let's initialize our base center position for our base dot position plus base dot size divided by 2. And let's reposition our main UI or our main joystick and run it. So let's check if it works as expected. So whenever we touch the joystick, it is repositioned based on our touch, and then whenever we go beyond our base boundaries, our joystick stays inside our base joystick. Now let's create our character. In our main 2D, let's have our sprite. Let's call it character. Then inside our character, let's create another sprite. Then inside our sprite 2D, let's create our child position 2D. Okay, this will be our skill arrow, and our position 2D will be our skill point. And then let's put our filter to the nearest, so it will be pixelated, as our character sprite is pixel art. Let's transform it to then for our skill arrow, let's put our arrow. Okay, and then scale it down 0.5. Then let's reposition our skill arrow. So for the offset, it's -14, and then for the position, it will be 20. So as you can see, our skill arrow overrides or overlays on top of our character. So let's put our ordering, and then character, let's put our ordering is 1. Okay, and then for our skill arrow, let's reposition it to, let's say, 60 or 75. Okay, so the point of our skill arrow, that will be the position of our skill point. Then in our script, let's put the reference of our skill arrow. Then our skill point. And let's create another variable. Let's call it skill direction. Okay. Then for our skill arrow, and then for our skill point. Then in our inputs, let's have our skill direction be initialized by our direction. Copy it also in our screen drag. Uncomment the process function. So if our is scaling is currently true, our skill arrow, that rotation will be set to our skill direction dot angle minus pi divided by 2. And then let's also put skill arrow dot show, and then if the is scaling is false, let's hide our skill arrow. And then make sure our initial visibility of the skill arrow is hide or hidden. Let's check our code. Whenever we move our joystick, our skill direction or our skill arrow follows our angle. Then let's create our projectile prefab, rigid body. Let's call it projectile. And then in our P6 material, new P6 material, friction 0, then bounciness set to 1. Let's have our sprite. And let's scale it 1.5. Let's also have our collision set to circle. And for our filter, let's put it to nearest. Then in our code, let's reference our prefab. So projectile vaccine. And then in our initialization, projectile vaccine. So let's load our projectile. Then whenever the input screen touch is released, let's call for a function fire projectile. Then let's create our projectile. Rigid body equals our vaccine, projectile vaccine, then instantiate. In Godot version 3, I think the instantiate has a different function name. Then in our projectile position, projectile.position, so let's set our initial position, skill point that global position. And then let's call deferred and add as a child our projectile. Add child projectile. Then lastly, our projectile should have its force or impulse. So let's apply a central impulse. Skill direction multiplied by, let's say, 1000. So the 1000 here, the greater the number, the greater the impulse or the greater the force. And then for the skill point, I have a typo here in line 30. So it must be skill point, not skill arrow. So in our projectile, let's set our gravity scale to 0. So that's it for this tutorial. I hope you learned something on how skill targeting works in touchscreens. In the future, I will create a devlog for my online mini RPG. So see you there too.